Good day. My name is Samanin Jim. I'm here at the request of Venerable Symphone from Wat Arun here in Bangkok. Today our guest is Samanin J from Tennessee. We have been talking about responsibilities of monks and traditional people have for their meditation and their choice in Buddhism and being Buddhists and what they might be able to do as far as applying their meditational experiences. Well, Jay, I want to say that you are a undergraduate student at the University of Tennessee, and that you're a junior.
Yes.
And your major is?
Religious studies.
Religious studies, good idea. And you're how old?
19.
You're moving right along here. We were talking about taking responsibility for the things that we know, and that applying that information into a secular world that may or may not be interested in hearing about us is certainly a problem that the Buddha had.
Yeah, I think definitely, whenever you're maybe upsetting or even asking questions about the status quo, there's a certain number of people who really don't want to hear you. And I think that's something that a lot of people who maybe get started in mysticism kind of get aborted by that.
Well, certainly the Buddha had to explain himself to people who weren't necessarily educated or well-educated, but he also had to debate against people who were very well-educated and who were very well-trained and had a very clear idea of what they thought or knew about meditational practices and experiences. And he had to do the whole range of teaching as far as his 45 years or so of teaching the Dharma or sharing the Dharma with others. Certainly we're going to have to learn debate, and it's certainly one of the criticisms that I've had within the Tibetan tradition or the Thai tradition here is that they don't debate or don't seem to be debating the things that they actually know.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be, and again, in my very limited experience, I've only been at Wat Arun, I haven't traveled that much. There doesn't seem to be much discussion or critical thinking related to, most of the thought that goes on, if there's thought involved.
And certainly I've been here for 3 years and was tested by the Supreme Patriarch in 1980. And we had, it wasn't exactly a debate, it was more of a meeting of minds and recognizing, let's say, common values, which is in fact part of a debate is to visit long enough to find out what you do have in common and what is in fact mutually valuable, and that how can we share that experience with others. And certainly our problem at current conditions, world conditions, facing what almost everyone imagines as a pretty big problem as far as world economy and just hundreds of different local issues that are currently unresolved and are likely to be resolved or certainly addressed in a very dramatic way in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I think definitely, this is a critical time in history, but, all times are critical.
And I completely agree, and part of threat analysis is how critical is this time as far as affecting people's choices and decisions and lifestyles. Is there, do you have a feeling about that?
As far as, people's lifestyles go, I don't know enough about politics and environmental issues to maybe say what people should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing, but I do have a feeling that just people generally trying to educate themselves about these things is what should be going on. If I have anything to say, it's just educate yourself.
Well, certainly this is what we're trying to do is explain our positions to others to see if there is a consensus here, and certainly trying to figure that out is, I think, our responsibility.
Yeah, I could say that, we're here, under the auspices of being Buddhist monks, not working, we should be doing something.
Well, are we, well, good question. Here, even though we're Samini monks, novices actually, are we good monks? Is this what a good monk should be doing?
A good monk according to whom, though?
Oh, yes, I guess. According to whom?
According to the tradition, probably not. I haven't memorized that much Pali since I've been here. I know some day-to-day prayers, day-to-day chants, but I haven't spent most of my time engaged in learning Pali. I don't, for the most part, agitate to go out and bless coffee bars. I don't particularly enjoy it. I spend most of my time thinking and reading. Is that considered good in the tradition? Maybe some of it's valued, but am I a model monk? No, not at all.
And how are you able to, how did you come to that conclusion given the information that you just stated about what is a good monk and what isn't a good monk?
I observed what the monks around me were doing who were considered good monks and realized that what I was doing was not what they were doing.
Not what the Thai people were doing. What
Right.
about Western monk?
I think most people who come and get involved in the Buddhist tradition aren't interested in coming and memorizing Pali and, blessing people's washing machines. Cool as that is, that's not what people are coming here for.
So there is a value standard for Western monks, and there's a cultural and value traditional standard for Thai and Asian monks.
Definitely, and I think they're worlds apart, almost not the same tradition.
I think that we need to establish that, and that there should be accommodations for that on both people's parts. Quite honestly, I've been here and in Sri Lanka for the last 3 years or so, and I have no real compulsion to be critical or to try to change local conditions or environments, because as far as I can tell, they work just fine for the people here. The monks and the Sangha here are not criticizing one another, and there's no reason for me to do that. I mean, but there is a responsibility on my behalf to notice that there's a difference.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not interested in reforming Thai Buddhism. I think that'd be a little bit presumptuous on any one Western monk's part, to come here and tell, the Thai people that your culture is not good. Who are we to say the culture is not good? What we can say, though, is that we're in it for something different.
And I think the differences are something that we can discuss, and that those conditions, even though they may change in the future, are the conditions we currently work under or with, and that we have to include that in our outcome management. I don't think it's impolite to state clearly that even though I'm personally not in conflict with what they're doing, I do notice that I have different values and value the information differently than they do. And I'm not in the position to criticize my own interpretation as being less valuable, because it's how I relate to the material. And I think that as monks, and even as what my experience with younger monks, is that however much they either understand or don't understand the tradition, they don't say anything about it. In Western tradition, that's not that's not the expectation. The expectation from Western students is that if you don't understand, you ask questions until you do, or change your mind, or you don't understand.
Right.
You come to some kind of other organization of the information rather than just either not understanding or not caring.
I think the not caring, generally, most of the interaction I have is actually with younger monks who speak English, because my Thai is very poor. A lot of the older monks, they speak some English, but not enough really to have discussions as much. And I've found that they're really almost two kinds of younger monks. There are monks who are long-term novices. They've been novices for years maybe, and then there are the cultural novices who are, sometimes who are old enough to be monks, who are ordaining for 3-4 months, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less time, and that's where the not caring really comes in. That the critical element in the tradition, at least, isn't apparent to me in the younger generation.
Well, since I don't have access to the younger generations, in fact, they leave me alone, which is something I think is very important. And I respect and value their insight in recognizing that it's better to leave me alone and let me do my own practices. And I do not have access to younger monks, or certainly younger monks that speak English. And that your insight for me is helpful and sad.
Yeah, it is, because what they're really involved in is a tradition that's based on intellectualism and spirituality, and you can see different aspects, even amongst small groups of monks, where some monks are very engaged in this. They're very scholarly and very devoted to the tradition, and then there's kind of a section who are we're here because we have to be here for 3 months.
Well, you're 19 years old, you're part of the younger monk folks, and you have a much different perspective than either one of those traditions.
Well, like I stated earlier,
or either one of those choices.
That I'm only here because the Buddha's teachings are here and because they're easily available here. I like Thailand enough, but there's no reason for me to be here besides the fact that this is a good place to find the Buddha's teachings for a manageable price. So I think that really maybe colors my perspective a lot, because I'm here really to do nothing but think critically about the tradition and the teachings and see if I can integrate them, whereas that isn't really something that most monks are called to do. So can we really criticize them for not thinking critically when they're not asked to?
Well, certainly the Western people that come here are not the stupid ones, are not the lazy ones. They're the ones that are able to take time out in their life to go ahead and explore very different options. And you can tell by how many Western monks there are in Thailand.
Yeah, I think there's 50 or so.
There may be, and we're talking about American monks, not just Europeans. There are many more Europeans and Australians than there are Americans. I don't know how many American monks there are. I remember when in 1980, when I came here, I asked how many Western monks they were, and they said 7.
Yeah.
And there were like 4 Australians, 2 Germans, and someone from Denmark. There was no American monks in 1980 in Thailand. And so the Western monks that come to Thailand are critical thinkers. And what I have noticed is that most of the teachings treat Western monks as if they were Thai monks.
Definitely.
And that what happens is they do notice that they don't think critically, they don't think analytically, they don't look at the choices that they're making now as how it might influence their life in the future. It is something that is done traditionally, and they do that. Even the monks that are dedicated to the tradition in a formal way for a lifestyle choice, analytical thinking is simply not included.
It's not something that's demanded in the tradition, though. So, on one hand, we might criticize them for not thinking analytically. On the other hand, we might criticize, the whole culture for not asking them to think analytically.
And I think we're suffering from the same problem in the United States as far as critically analyzing our own choices and the things that we do in the United States. I think it's a cultural problem regardless of what culture you're in.
Oh yeah, it's not specific to Thailand. Thailand has the same problems as America, as everywhere else.
And so we're actually looking at a problem applying spiritual, metaphysical, and traditional values to cultures that have their own rigid expectations, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of leeway in any of these people's formal structure.
One of the things I kind of danced around earlier was that to make these, spiritual metaphysical ideas relevant, you have to make them secular. That there has to be a secular understanding of these ideas for them to have any sort of widespread acceptance.
And did the Buddha do that?
I think to an extent, but the Buddha was also a product of his time. The religious context he was teaching in was, BC India. He was teaching in a system that included karma, that included reincarnation, and in a primarily Vedic world. That's not the world we're in now.
And my feeling is that he was secularly relevant in addressing people's ordinary problems, however trivial they may appear. And my feeling is that secularizing the tradition or the information you get in meditation is in fact figuring out how it is relevant to trivial issues.
Yeah, definitely. It's like we said earlier, it's you can shout mystic truths at people all you want. It doesn't make them, want to listen to you. And I would say if you're shouting the mystic truths, you probably don't really know them either.
Oh, I completely agree. And this is not what Gandhi did. Gandhi actually took extraordinarily sophisticated ideas and applied them to a secular application by saying, how can you make money? You can weave your own cloth. This is taking a very complicated and sophisticated argument and applying it in a secular way that gave them benefit instantly.
Definitely, and I think that's going to be the successful model. I have a lot of respect for, like we talked earlier, the mystics who go far beyond culture, and I think they're engaged in something that is definitely unique. Whether it's relevant or not is up to them after they've gotten there, if they have anything useful to bring back.
And yes, if are you interesting when you come back? And that certainly is, from my experience, mostly they're not.
I feel definitely the same way. That especially people who are engaged in mystical aspects of traditional religions who are just highly contemplative all the time.
Well, certainly you have a problem with traditionalists being effective, and I think the mystics have the same problem being effective from an entirely different point of view with using entirely different bits of information. And effectiveness, certainly applying effectiveness within a secular model is in fact the whole idea.
Yeah, that's, I think that if you remove the mystic tradition from the metaphysics of the traditional tradition. There's a whole perspective from traditional Buddhism that says one should meditate for merit because it's good, because you can attain higher rebirths. I don't have a yes or no statement about that. I personally don't know. And I don't really have any desire to know either. What I do know is that you can meditate for benefit here, now, to help other people. And maybe it's not through communicating merit to them and making their lives better, but it might be quieting down, thinking about something, and going and talking to them about it.
Well, certainly one of the, let's call it a mystical application of that, is getting people to stop. And when I was doing therapy, it took me a half an hour just to get somebody in the room. And that was, not in a fantasy, not in the future, not worrying about their past, not worrying about their problems or conditions, and not even in anticipation about what might happen. Just getting them in the room, paying attention to the question. And I was unable to do this faster than a half an hour.
Yeah, I think definitely, it's we're very much a product of the speed of the lives we live. I think globalization has influenced this, but it's also, just who we are as people for the most part. The mind moves very quickly. Getting it to stop can be very difficult. And
maybe one of the things that we might want to consider as far as applying either spiritual, mystical, or metaphysical insights into the secular world is it possible to get them to just stop long enough to see what they're doing?
I think definitely it's possible, but it happens on an individual level. It doesn't happen through, politics and social reform. It's an individual stopping and thinking critically about what they're doing.
The image I get of the Chinese man that's managed to stop a whole column of tanks just by not moving. Incredible visual image. And may there be, for example, in the Vietnam War, there were two pictures that actually changed Americans' idea about the Vietnam War. One was the girl running from the village, and the soldiers there with the guns in the village burning in the background. And at the time, I was in the military from 61 to 65, which was the early part of Vietnam War. But that picture went through the United States like fire itself. And what the Americans said is, we don't burn villages and we don't attack little girls. And it made us stop and think about what we're doing when the Pentagon Papers and other arguments simply were ignored. And another one is when the president of Vietnam executed the person. So we don't do that. And those two pictures, I think, were able to stop us long enough to say, is this what we want to do? And the fact that just stopping was enough to get us to just change our mind. Or even just slowing down in this incredible momentum that you mentioned, that we're just going so quickly, is how do we, and the faster you go, when you crash into something, the crashier the crash. And I mean, is there ways for maybe you and I to think of a method of just slowing this frenzy down?
I think, like I said, it's a process that can only happen individually, and there are many techniques, mystical, meditative, and otherwise, that are all primarily focused on getting someone to stop thinking, and then to start thinking again, but slowly, and think about what they're doing.
Well, not just stop thinking, but stop doing, stop being busy.
Yeah, there's many...
and caught up in the frenzy, which I think that from a Western point of view, I think many Western people are going, how can I escape the frenzy? Not just the thinking busy mind, which mostly I think they are consciously aware of, but the frenzy that they're in.
Almost every tradition has some way that's designed, or even if it's not designed to stop the frenzy, it does stop the frenzy, Buddhism has meditation, Hinduism has meditation, it also has devotional practices. Other religions have all sorts of practices, but even in the secular world, things like psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, in Western philosophical traditions, Socratic dialogue, all of these things are really built to slow people down and make them think critically.
Well, I'm going to bring up a topic here, television. We're on television now, or YouTube, which would be we're on a computer, which is pretty close to the same thing. And what my feeling is that television does get you to slow down and stop. You sit in front of the television and somebody asks you, what are you doing? I'm watching television, which means you're not doing anything.
Right.
And that they're spending 4 or 5 hours a day watching television. And my feeling is that the reason they're watching television is they don't want to do anything. They need to take that time off to not do anything.
I think definitely there's I can only speak from the Western perspective, that there's a strong need to have a period of time where you're not doing anything, and television is a good way to justify that, because otherwise you're just sitting there and people think you're weird. And
they just definitely think you're weird, but if you're watching television, then that's what they say. What are you doing? I'm watching television, which changes your meditation from just sitting there in a quiet room not doing anything to you're watching television. And that seems to be a model or a methodology for Western people just to turn off for a while. And it's whether they're being entertained or whether they're just in a quiescent state of between here and there, and not being in constant conflict with issues. For example, when you talked about contemplating and imagining things or reorganizing things in your mind so that they're clearer, I think what's happening, television as an example, is you're not doing anything. You're not organizing, reorganizing, or anything. You're just doing nothing for a period of time for you to just recover from the frenzy.
And I think that that's a really important time to have. You know, maybe on its own, is it valuable? It's a stopgap measure. In conjunction, after that, you know, after you've, you know, stopped that frenzy some, that's when you can do the reorganization.
Yes. Is that, for example, we're on television now, or maybe we're very likely to be on YouTube, and it takes a half an hour to watch what our conversation or discussion, and that's a half hour you're not doing something else.
Right.
And I'm not sure that how effective that may be. Who knows? But is this a method? Is this a tool that can be used to remind people to, you know, don't worry, be happy, at least for some part of your day, and not necessarily advising them in any specific way, but just giving them an opportunity to take a break and see if they want to change their mind in whatever way that may happen.
Yeah, I think definitely if I have any sort of agenda, it's only that, you know, I'm not convinced that I have anything really valuable to say, as much as somebody maybe take a break and then think about what they know, as opposed to, you know, listening to me blather on about what I may or may not know.
Is that a solution?
It's maybe a first step, maybe it's just a stopgap measure, but, you know, that's what we can do.
Well, let's decide to do that in whatever way that may manifest itself in our future life here, or the future time that we have here, is the idea of stop is enough. Without putting any other kind of conditions on it, that maybe it's something that we can do.
Yeah, I think definitely. And it's not hard to do. It's not really difficult to stop. It can be maybe counterproductive sometimes. People can think you're a little bit weird if you're just sitting there, but it's nice to do, definitely, as somebody who's, you know, at various points been more or less engaged in the frenzy. I tend not to be now at all because I'm here as a novice in Thailand, but it's nice just to stop, you know, watch TV, you know, just sit, do something.
Rather than in the 1950s it was don't worry, be happy, Sai Baba, which was wonderful. Maybe we could come up with a statement something like just sitting there is enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I could subsidize that.
Well, it needs to be simple enough. You're talking about applying metaphysical strategies to the secular world, and maybe giving permission to people just to sit there is enough. Or is it something that will enable them to just sit there and at least not do something wrong?
Yeah, if anybody's actually watching right now, you have my permission as a Thai novice just to sit there.
And at least not do something wrong.
Definitely.
Well, who knows? Maybe maybe it'll catch on. We start an avalanche of insight.
Possibly.
Anyway, thank you very much for your visitor, and I want to thank everyone for spending the half hour with us.